Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Plant-Free MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest, Mr. Mick Sullivan, who is going to tell us his quite amazing story of athletics and health. So, Mick, thank you so much for joining.
Hi, Anthony. Thanks. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So, for people who haven't come across you before, can you tell us a bit about you?
Sure. I'm my wife Jenny and myself. We live in Australia in a small town in the Snowy Mountains, where it's basically a fine wool sheep and beef cattle grazing area. So it's quite rural, and most of grazing down there is all native pastures, which is nice. It's very little tilled agriculture. And yeah, Jenny's my soulmate. We've done a lot of things together since we met, and she's also carnivore and she runs ultras like I do. So yeah, we're currently in Chiang Mai in Thailand. We've just done an event last weekend. That went well. We sort of both sort of got in our placings in our age groups for the 100-kilometer event. I won my age group and Jenny got second in hers. So
oh, nice.
Carnivore does work.
Yeah, absolutely. So how were you doing ultras and marathons and things like that prior to going carnivore?
Yes.
Yeah.
We've always done a lot of endurance activity. So for about 30 odd years, we were cross-country skiers, and we do cross-country skiing competitions, which is great endurance and aerobic base. And then in 2015, we retired from managing a ski lodge. So we realized we weren't going to be able to ski most days like we were in winter. And we looked for some kind of retirement challenge. So we decided to take up trail running. And yeah, that little challenge has become an all-consuming passion now. But yeah, it definitely challenged us because we went from a non-impact sport to an impact sport. So it took some time to adapt. But it wasn't long, and we were both running ultra marathons and gradually increasing in distance. You know, what seemed really long and daunting at first now is sort of, easy, and we're moving on to the next level. So, but yeah, kind of when we did keto and then carnivore, but that changed quite a bit with our performance and our ability to recover, and yeah.
Okay. So what made you switch over to keto and then carnivore?
I'd had a lot of joint muscle issues for over 30 years since I was in my mid-30s. It never stopped me from doing the activities I want to do, but yeah, it was always there, making it hard to get out of bed in the morning, and I was often pulling muscles when I was trying to, run or cross-country ski. Yeah, just a lot of little injuries. And it got to a point in sort of 2021, I was doing a couple of ultras, and I kind of really hit the wall badly in them at about the 30K mark. And at first, I wasn't sure what was happening. Thought it could have been the heart or something. So I had all that testing done through cardiologists, echocardiogram and a stress test on the treadmill, etc. So that was thoroughly checked out. They said basically there's nothing wrong with my heart. So then the other consideration is whether it was nutrition. So I think I'd lost a lot of fat adaptation, especially through COVID years, because we weren't going trekking in Nepal. We often would go trekking in the Nepal Himalaya, and that's long sustained work with sort of less carb, less food intake. Anyhow, Jenny decided first of all to try keto. She had a few more health issues than I had and was trying to sort of get on top of them. So she tried it first up. She'd heard of a guy called Sherpa Herb who had this elimination diet for, I think, 21 days to try it out. So she tried that and found quite a good improvement. So it's easier if both people in the household are eating the same thing. So I joined in, and it's been all go since then. That was keto, of course, at first.
Mhm.
Um, and then within 6 months, my endurance level had improved considerably. And it was put 2022, early that year, I think we both went carnivore. It was an evolution, but once it started, it was obvious to us that, especially me, my inflammation levels had gone down. Even my left knee, which has always, been a bit of a problem, it's kind of worn out, and all the faces of all the joints in there are quite degraded. But all of a sudden, I was even getting on top of that knee issue. So obviously, the food was making a big difference.
Yeah. Oh, very good. And so you mentioned that you had changes in your performance and your recoveries. It sounds like you have a reduction in your inflammation and better recovery. Is that right?
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Uh, I think after an ultra, like a long, let's say 50 kilometers plus, the body's been hammered pretty hard.
Hmm.
And I find that the less carbs or anything like that I would have after an event, and after an event, you've often got food given to you post-event, etc. So it's tempting to have it, but I find the less of it I have, the quicker I seem to recover. And
Hmm.
I know I've heard of there's an American ultra runner called Jeff Browning, and he does a lot of like long events, especially like 200 miles and 250 miles and these sort of things. And he stated that in a 48-hour period after event, if he doesn't have any carbohydrates at all, then he actually finds his recovery is so much better. And he
Yeah.
competes at the elite level.
Yeah.
So I took that on board, and it's still an experimentation. We're still working it out, but that
Mhm.
appears to be what happens. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, I've noticed a huge difference in like the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness that you get after you do a big workout. It's pretty much non-existent as long as you're not eating any plants whatsoever or coffee, which is a hard one for people to give up, so they don't always necessarily fully experience it. But the carbohydrates and especially the things that come along with the carbohydrates, the grains and potatoes and things like that, I find that those can be quite inflammatory and cause quite a lot of pain after working out and a slow recovery. You see these people talking about, well, you need to have longer recoveries to, you only lift weights once every 5 days or these sorts of things. And certainly an argument for that, but I would argue that it's not the case for us because I don't get that inflammation and I don't get that pain and soreness. I'm not sort of desperately trying to recover after that. I could do the same thing next day every day, and obviously you need time to recover, you need time to regrow, but from a pain and inflammation side of things and recovery side of things, it's absolutely not an issue for me.
mm.
uh, when you made that change to keto, because this is something that especially in the athletic community, people are very concerned about their performance dropping off or not being able to compete at the same level when they transition to like a ketogenic diet. I mean, there's plenty of studies showing that you get the same output or even improved output months down the road, um, weeks to months down the road on a ketogenic diet. But they're quite worried about that transition. How did you find the transition from going from a more standard approach to then a ketogenic approach? Did you find that your performance dropped off for a while?
uh, I would say that some of my daily energy did drop.
Mhm.
My performance in events, not so much. It seemed to be
Right.
that once I got into an event and got going, I
Mhm.
might be a bit slower to start in the event, but once I got going, the metabolism just seemed to pick up, and away I went. But day to day, for initially, I did find the energy level lower. We've got a really good doctor that we see in Sydney, the Sydney low carb specialist, Dr. Deepa. And we once we started keto, we went and saw her and said what we wanted to do, and she did kept monitoring the blood work. And then she said, well, like Jenny's adapted really well quickly to it. She said, I might need to do a little bit of carb periodization for a while until I adapt. I might be slower adapted to it. So for a few months, I did do reintroduced a little bit of carbs, a little bit like Zach Bitter and Jeff Browning doing their training. And then, yeah, that worked. It helped. The energy level in training and day to day was a little higher. But within a few months, I was then able to wean off that and don't seem to need anywhere near as much as what I did then.
Mhm.
So it was an adaptation in my case that happened over time. And Jenny, it was very quick. So obviously, different people respond differently to it. So
Yeah, great. So, but at this point, you've been doing this for a number of years, really.
two
So,
years.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, perfect. So, and now full carnivore as well. So, what is it like training now and competing now as a carnivore versus prior to that? What is that as far as your energy levels, how your performance, how you're doing? I mean, you've done some huge races and had some very, very good results. Maybe walk us through some of those, and then the recovery afterwards. What does that look like now that you're presumably older, but also very different diet?
Yes. Well, I'm in sort of certainly one of the oldest age classes for competing in these ultras. And but I would say in the last 2 years since going carnivore, I'm feeling younger, not older.
Right.
Performance is improving, not going backwards. So it's kind of interesting to be at this point in life, but then it's almost like having a new lease on life, thinking, well, what else can I do with this, newfound sort of ability to perform? So, yeah, so this year, I guess, was the culmination of a couple of years of hard training.
Mhm.
I've been trying to get into the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc for 4 years because
Mm.
you've got to qualify, you've got to get enough points, you've got to go for a ballot process. And so this was the fourth time, and I finally got into it. And it is like the Tour de France is for cycling, or the Boston, New York marathons is for road running. It's the pinnacle event of the trail running calendar. It's all the professionals. That's the one they want to win, the big one. So I finally got into it, and it is in France. It starts in Chamonix and finishes in Chamonix. So it does a full circumnavigation of Mount Blanc. It's
Mm.
176 kilometers and just under 10,000 meters of vertical. So it's equivalent of going over the top of Mount Everest from sea level and then adding
Jeez.
another 1,000 meters and coming
Oh,
back down again. So
yeah.
it's pretty demanding. And yeah, I had the race of my life, basically.
Hmm.
Everything worked well. And I won my age class. So that was
Nice.
the proof of the pudding that these changes in lifestyle can have some very positive effects.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like you said, I mean, this is the competition that professional runners would be in as well. Were you competing against other professional runners as well, or is it not as
Yeah,
much
it's
your age
the
group?
professionals obviously at the front of the field. It's open to
Yeah.
amateurs as well if you make all the
Hmm.
criteria. So there was 2,800 runners started that event. They have a number of events in the festival, but that's the big one. So 2,800 runners started that event, and about 1,001 runners withdrew throughout the race. It's a pretty
Right.
hard event. It has a
Yeah.
very high attrition rate. And so, yeah, there was about just under 1,800 runners finished the event.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. What a monster. And then, okay, well, first of all, congratulations. That's amazing that
okay.
you did that. That sounds awful. Like for me, like the reason I would run was because I wanted to just get in good shape so I could go and hit people. But like there was an NFL guy I saw in this film. NFL Crunch Course is one of my favorite old school ones videos. And there's a special teams guy, and he's just like, like, yeah, I want to, on the kickoff, I'm trying to get to the ball carrier, I'm trying to move around and, get to, try to make a play and, make a tackle. But, if I can't get to the ball carrier, like I'm hitting someone, like I'm not running 40 yards and not hitting somebody, it's just like, that's sort of how I feel. Like, I'm doing this, to smash somebody at the end of this, so like running for 100 miles, not going to hit anybody. It's
Well, you're hitting yourself.
yeah. Well, there's that. If I could check people into a tree or something like that as I'm walking by, that would give me some motivation to start in the back and work my way up and just smash people all the way, and that would motivate me to sort of move up. But probably not going to let me do that. but that's fine. But that's amazing. It's an amazing race. I mean, obviously, Mount Blanc is absolutely stunning. So you're going to be in these gorgeous locations, but very grueling. 10,000 meters of elevation is pretty wicked on the body. How did you feel after that race, and how long was your recovery?
I surprised myself actually. Normally, after an event like that, it'd take me over a week before I could
Mhm.
even think of running. But was pretty active about 3 days later and starting to jog around on some of the hikes and that about 4 or 5 days later. So
Yeah,
recovery was pretty quick.
yeah,
And
great.
considering that was the longest race I'd ever done and probably the hardest,
Hmm.
yeah, I was surprised. So, mm.
Yeah, no, very good. Um, so you and your wife are doing this. Are there and now you're coming in top, like you just said, you just won another race up in Thailand. Are other people starting to take notice? Do you know other runners that are starting to take a ketogenic approach to their run? I mean, obviously there are ultra marathoners and Ironman athletes that do this already, but have what are you seeing from the inside?
It's it's tricky in that ultra trail running has
Hmm.
an element to it that the more steady state sports like triathlon and road running doesn't have, and that is we have mountains.
Hmm.
So you've got periods whereby the intensity potentially can be a lot higher, and then periods where you're running down a hill, which doesn't mean it's easy, but it's nevertheless the cardio demand and energy demand isn't quite as high. So it makes it quite hard in trail running I think, for a lot of people to manage that low carbohydrate approach. But once you do, it does work well. But you've got to really moderate your intensity in the event so that you can sustain yourself sort of for longer. And then towards the end of the event, as I found this year in UTMB, I'd had such a steady state for the first 120 kilometers. And then the last 50, I had plenty of energy to burn. So I used it and overhauled lots of people who
Hmm.
pretty much were dying at that point. But understandably, it's a long way.
Hmm.
So it takes a different approach. And we're kind of in the trail running space, there's a huge amount of emphasis being put on carb doping. 120 grams per hour of carbohydrates is
Wow.
even 140 grams per hour. And look, it might work for some people, especially the elites, those who take the time to adapt to it, but it's not something I would want to have to do for performance, and I wouldn't be willing to do it for performance. But then there's the unanswered question of what happens in the long term if you're ingesting that amount of carbohydrate
Yeah.
in these events, and that hasn't been answered yet. So yeah, there's all these studies saying,
Mm.
oh yes, with this little carbohydrate, you might be able to improve your performance, but what's going to happen in 2, 5, 10 years time?
Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia. It's Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass fed and finished pasture raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Well, the thing is, we do know a lot of these guys are getting pre-diabetic and diabetic, and their bodies are breaking down, and just that excess glucose, um, you know, um, damages the body, and it also damages the joints. And we're seeing this in arthritis, that degeneration of the articular cartilage in your knees and your hips and your shoulders, and also in the discs in your spine, that a lot of these are finding high levels of glycation, so advanced glycation end products, the damage that you get from ramming in carbs in your face all the time, because above physiological levels, blood glucose is toxic to your body, and your body treats it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it and keep it below basically 4 grams. You only have about 4 grams of glucose in your entire bloodstream at any given time, which is not all that much. And so you get a lot of damage. It's interesting from an athletic point of view because you actually use less oxygen to make the same amount of ATP from fat oxidation than you do from glucose. And you also use less NAD plus. You actually use one NAD plus molecule to make the same amount of energy as you do as glucose. So glucose will require four times the amount of NAD plus to make the same amount of ATP. And so then the inflammation side of things, your high ketones suppress the NLRP3 inflammasome. So you just get less inflammation and you're eating less inflammatory foods. People say meat's so inflammatory. Who told you that? Right? It's like it's not actually true. And people just have said it and they just believe it because, oh yeah, meat's evil. So obviously definitely going to cause more inflammation. It doesn't. And there's no evidence to show that it does. And the real world evidence shows that it doesn't. People's inflammation reduces and going into ketosis reduces it as well. So you get all these benefits. I'm testosterone. I mean, I've men's testosterone doubling or tripling when they do this. I mean, do you try to tell me that that's not going to improve your performance as an athlete? It's of course it is. And the interesting thing about saying, well, you need to ramp up how many grams of carbs you have per hour as a high performance athlete or an ultra marathoner or something like that. That's really only in the context of those studies have only been in the context of people that eat carbs anyway. And so saying, okay, well, if you're already eating carbs, then more carbs may be better. And then there's other ones that say, actually, even the carb athletes, you don't actually need more than 20 grams a day or an hour, you know, and as a carb athlete. So, if it were saying, well, 50, 150, 500 grams of carbs an hour, that's the best. It's still only going to be in that context of someone who's already eating carbs. Um, the amount of energy that you make through fat oxidation, it far outstrips the amount of energy that you can actually use in an hour. So you actually are more than capable of producing adequate energy levels. That's something that Dr. Paul Mason talks about. He's one of the top exercise sports medicine doctors around, really. He's over in Sydney. But I was talking to him about that, and it's just like, yeah, actually, and he broke out the numbers, and it's just like, this is like maximal exertion. You're just killing yourself, and as a top flight athlete per hour is actually far less than your capacity to generate energy. And so, it's not actually like an energy sort of thing that you're lacking. You mentioned that. That sometimes like Zach Bitter and some of these other guys, you have this sort of carbohydrate periodization where you might have what do you got now? You mentioned this when we were talking offline, that during your training you just fasted, you're just ketogenic the whole time and you feel great, but then on performance day you will use a bit of carbs. Is that right?
Yes. What I do is basically I don't use carbs generally in training.
Mhm.
I don't feel I need to. I can go out for 3, 5, 6 hours of running, even in the mountains in Europe, and I don't feel the need to have to eat.
Mhm.
I have a nice steady flow of energy, and this has just proven itself time and time again.
Mhm.
So I don't feel I have the need for carbs in that. When it comes to race time, if it's an A race, like
Mhm.
one that's really important, at this point in time, I'm still experimenting with a low carb approach to those
Mhm.
events. In time, I will with some B events, but I haven't had one for a while. Then
Mhm.
I'll experiment with trying to do without. And with those, I usually now I'm down to about 20 to 30 grams of carbs per hour.
Mhm.
And that's every 30 minutes on the hour and half hour, I have a small dose.
Mhm.
So I'm not sort of overloading the stomach or GI, but it's enough to keep the GI system active because in a long event, if you don't put something in your stomach, then blood flow will go from your stomach to other parts of your body and it's harder to get it back. So the idea is you've got to just keep a little bit of digestion ticking over to keep the GI system working. And so the carbohydrates that I have are basically glucose based, and I try to avoid or minimize the fructose component. So I make my own carbohydrate jelly out of gelatin and glucose basically, and we use that, and it's basically 10 grams per jelly. So I'll have one of those every half an hour. And then if I'm running through an aid station or something, I might grab a bit of something extra. It might be a piece of watermelon and or a bit of rice, but that's about it. Most of the food in the aid stations I just don't touch. In Europe, it's got plenty of cheese and salami, which is great, but here in Thailand, it was just all sugary food, and the
Yeah.
only savory foods had a lot of gluten and wheat in them, which I didn't want to touch. So
Mm.
it was a little bit more challenging, the food here in Thailand and in the racing compared to Europe. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So do you feel that you've noticed a difference like on those race days that it's changed like from your training? Because obviously you're doing very high load on your training days and you're saying you feel great. Have you noticed that you feel any better with that addition, or is it more of a safety precaution at this point?
No, it's really because of the mountains,
Hmm.
and in the race, it's usually the bigger mountains and more of them.
Hmm.
It's in my thinking at the moment, and this is only at the moment. This idea can evolve, of course.
Hmm.
It's about maintaining the glycogen that's within the muscle anyway, that's
Hmm.
there through eating a non-carb diet.
Hmm.
That's there before the event is to try during the event to at least sustain that level without draining it too quickly on the first couple of big climbs. And
Hmm.
we're talking 2,000 meter climbs. So they can be quite taxing on the carbs if you hit them too hard.
Hmm.
Um, so through moderating the pace and then just having a very small amount of carbs, it seems to work for me
Hmm.
quite well. I don't feel any particular adverse effect at that level. But when I
Hmm.
was having 50, 60, 70 grams of carbs per hour, which is not high by normal standards,
Hmm.
yeah, I didn't feel that worked well for me.
Yeah.
And about a month before UTMB this year, I was listening to a podcast out running, and Jeff Browning was being interviewed about one of his 200-mile events. And he mentioned in that he found that if he was running at, like the 50, 60 gram carb per hour level, he didn't feel as good. And when he sort of dropped it down a bit, he felt a lot better in the events. But they're very long events. So again, there's that threshold. If you go up to a certain point and your body tolerates it, it seems to work for me. But if I go over that level, then all of a sudden, rather than being an advantage, it's detrimental. And
Hmm.
if you look at in trail running, at least, and running generally, often they say about 70% of did not finish runners is due to GI issues.
Hmm.
And that's a huge amount. And now
Yeah.
with this super carbohydrate loading that they're doing, it wouldn't surprise me that number is going to be amongst the elites as well as the midfield as well, because
Yeah.
the amount of carbs they're consuming is huge. And if they haven't completely adapted to that, I think GI issues is a natural consequence.
Yeah, there's Pete Jacobs, who's a Ironman world champion, and he won that. I think it was 2015. But he just said he was just horribly felt horrible, had horrible gut issues, had horrible issues, health issues, and he was able to do it. But then he just felt absolutely wrecked because of it. And it's just like, okay, well, is your body actually getting the best performance that it can when you actually feel like, rolled over garbage? I couldn't imagine how. And he subsequently went carnivore actually, and talked about how actually he's reversed all of his issues and his gut issues, and he felt amazing. He's just like, yeah, I'm back training again. I feel great. Whereas before, he basically peaked at the winning the championship, and from the reading an article about him, I haven't spoken to him, but it sounded like he just sort of took a step back for a while because he just had so many health issues. He just couldn't train properly. And then when he went keto carnivore, that all healed, and now he was able to sort of start training again a few years after that, which is interesting. It's like you said, is can this carbohydrates give you a performance advantage? There's arguments both ways. I would argue that you don't need them once you're fully fat adapted. But let's say that it does. Is it sort of worth it? I mean, why wouldn't it be a better approach to do like you're doing, which is, train without this stuff and use a very small amount if that were to help you, and not so much that you're actually causing serious metabolic harm and distress. Because you shouldn't be diabetic as an ultra marathon runner, an elite athlete around the world. I mean, you should be exercising enough that this is fine, but you can't outrun a bad diet. Even though there are people out there, like Dr. Peter Attia is a big proponent of exercising. That this is just really the main thing that you need to do for health and longevity. But you need this in combination of a proper diet, because you have all these people that are brilliant athletes, just train harder than anybody else and perform better than anybody else, and they're dying. I mean, they're getting serious metabolic disease. One of my dad's favorite runners, marathon runners, that was, I don't know, back in the 80s and 90s. This guy said that doesn't matter what you eat as long as you train. And so he would eat McDonald's and junk food and sodas and all that sort of stuff. And he dropped dead of a heart attack at 40. So is that really getting you where you want to go? Probably not. And it is interesting. Talking about the glycogen side of things, there was a study in 2016 by Volek and Finney called the FASTER study that looked at this and looked at elite ultra endurance athletes who were already doing keto, and so they had to be they were all at least 9 months on, and the highest one was like 36 months. It was like 3 years. And the average for all of these athletes were about 20 months. And he compared this to other, elite ultra endurance athletes. And so he sort of looked at fat oxidation, because the argument is that after 60% VO2 max, you get out of this zone 2 cardio stage and you start burning carbs. But they actually found that was only in the carb athletes. And so that the keto athletes that had been keto adapted for quite some time, so this wasn't like a just started off. You do need to adapt. There is a period of adaptation. That they were not only performing at extremely high levels, but they were still burning fat at over 90% VO2 max to a significant degree. And so, we didn't see that. The interesting thing about the Volek trial, the FASTER study, was that they actually looked at glycogen. They looked at muscle glycogen. And so they did muscle biopsies before a big trial, some sort of, 3-hour run or something like that. And they did a muscle biopsy before, immediately after, and then 3 hours after they had a chance to recover. And they found that at all 3 points, both the keto and carb group were nearly identical, even though the carb athletes were sucking down sugar packets and sweets and carbs and things like that. And the keto athletes were not taking in any carbohydrates whatsoever. And they still had the same glycogen. And so it's telling you your body is going to, when you're in the right metabolic state, is going to be able to provide the energy that's required, which is obviously important, when you're a high endurance athlete. So, that's what sort of makes me think that this is probably something that, I mean, it's certainly myself as an athlete, I never hit that point where I was just like, "Ooh, I'm really dragging." The harder I pushed myself, the more my body gave me, and I was able to outperform everybody around me in rugby. And it makes me sort of curious, because especially because you obviously, if you're coming in top of your age group in this massive Mont Blanc run, obviously you're training hard as hell. You can't win without training hard as hell. But you're not using carbs during your training, so you're doing that. You did mention off air that you actually tried a marathon fasted. And so you didn't eat anything, including carbs. And yeah, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so before France this year, I wanted to test my fat adaptation
Hmm.
and to see if I really was oxidizing fat efficiently. because it's been a couple of years that I've been, on the carnivore diet. And so I'd heard Alex McDonald's
Hmm.
talk about his 5 marathons in 5 days fasted. And I thought, oh, that's kind of inspirational. So I
Hmm.
kind of took that idea and then applied it to a trail marathon. So it was 42 Ks. It was near Canberra, called the Cohen, and it's got elevation. It's not mountainous, but it's 1,500 or 1.7 thousand meters of vertical, so enough to kind of be taxing. And I did that one fasted. I uh, bettered my personal best on that course by 5 minutes.
Nice.
Now, I chose that event because I had previous results. I didn't see a lot of point going out doing a fasted event in something that I hadn't done before. So that's the reason for choosing that. And I wasn't actually expecting to better my time. I was expecting to have a good run, or I wasn't thinking I was going to actually get a PB on it, but
Hmm.
I did. And what I found was that my energy level was just constant
Hmm.
right through the event. It was the first time I'd really felt that just smoothness from start to finish. And yeah, it was a very nice feeling. And considering I had no electrolytes, we make our own batch of homebrew electrolytes, got nothing but the minerals and that in it. So long as I was having that, it was good. And then a few weeks later, I tried another one. It was a 36-kilometer event up near Sydney called Rafferty's. And that was involved hilly coastlines and running on beaches and things, so a little different. And that one I did fasted as well. The difference between the 42K is I had a little bit of rice 48 hours before the event, and in the Rafferty's I ditched that element altogether. And that was not only was fasted on the day, but had been sort of carb free that whole week up to it. So
Hmm.
that was the difference there. The reason I sometimes before a big event, I'll have in my taper period, if I think that in the event I'm going to have something like rice or fruit, then in the taper period, at one point in there, I'll have one or two pieces of fruit, probably 4 or 5 days out, and then maybe a cup of rice 2 days out. And it's just to switch on any
Hmm.
metabolisms and enzymes and things I might need in the event for digesting those items,
Hmm.
just to reduce potential GI issue. But I'm finding as time goes on, the need for that's less and less. So probably down the track, I probably won't even bother with that. But
Hmm.
because I seem to be able to handle the race food anyway. I've always had a pretty strong stomach, fortunately. I've been able in the past to eat anything without much consequence. A lot of people have GI issues and come to keto and carnivore for that reason. Jenny had reflux, so it was one of her reasons for coming to keto in the first place. Um, and she's resolved all that now. But
Hmm.
yeah, I've been lucky. I've had that sort of cast iron stomach, so.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah, I wonder if there's this idea of insulin preloading, where if you've been ketogenic for a very long time, you don't pre-make insulin in your pancreas, and so you have a slower reaction to a carbohydrate oral carbohydrate load. Whereas, and but when your insulin comes up, then your um, everything works very well. In fact, because you're even more insulin sensitive, and so that drives that energy into the cells more quickly. But it can take a couple of days to basically tell your pancreas like, oh, we're doing this again. Okay, all right, start making some insulin ahead of time. So I wonder if there's an element to do with that. Um, but the one of the things that I was speaking to Dr. Paul Mason about on this was that there's something called the central governor of fatigue, and this has only been tested in carbohydrate athletes. So, you know, it is what it is. But when people max out, even though they say it's like, okay, well, there's energy available in their body, they still have glycogen, they still have blood sugar, and they're fat oxidizing, part of this sort of thing. their body can sort of start shutting down a bit, and you start hitting this wall, and you just start feeling pretty wrecked. And one thing that they can do is you give them a little bit of carbohydrates, not enough to actually give them a lot of energy, but just enough to like get that sweet response on your tongue. Really, some sort of like simple sugars, something sweet, and then you sort of get that on your tongue, and then would swallow that. That can actually break that slump, and then all of a sudden you have this ramped up energy again. And they tried that with just tasting that sweet thing, and something sweet, and you just tasted that, held it in your mouth for a while, swished it around, and then spit it out. They had the same energy jump. So it wasn't the carbohydrates they were consuming. It was just their body saying, hey, look, we're using a lot of energy. You need to slow your roll. And so you're in a conservation sort of approach. Your body just starts governing the amount of energy available and starts tiring you out, saying, hey, look, this is a bad idea. Possibly had something to do with like what runners used to talk about, back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, that you'd hit the wall and you'd have to push and fight through, and then you'd break through the wall, and then you'd have your second win. Maybe that's that, where you're fighting this central governor of fatigue, but then you're just like, no, we're doing this, and they fight through that. Could also be biochemically, where you run out of glycogen and now your body's having to struggle to make energy, and then sort of forcing yourself into a more ketogenic approach and running on your fat. It could be a combination of both. But it is interesting. I never ran into that as an athlete. I mean, you'd get worn out at a certain point when I was training, but I was able to train hard enough and long enough that eventually I got in such good shape. I just didn't get tired, and I just couldn't wear myself out. And so I can't even look back on a time and say, oh, well, maybe I could have tried that. But that is a thing. That is a phenomenon that's been studied in sports medicine. It'd be interesting to me, if that has a lot to do with it, with these ultra marathoners and high performance athletes that do ketogenic, but they say, well, maybe just have a little bit, and that sort of helps them through. I would wonder if that's part of it as well. And it may be that, because you running a marathon that's a warm up, right? You're training, you're running for 5, 6 hours, and you're feeling great the whole time. Well, marathon doesn't take that long unless you're walking, so it's like, you can crush this marathon, in half that time. So you're probably not going to hit that governor where your brain's saying like, no, 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 you got to slow down, which is why I was sort of wondering, is that something your body actually requires? I'd be really interested to see that, if there's events or maybe even like a training that you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to run, 100K on this training event or just a practice run or something like that. And you saw how you performed and how you felt. I'd be really interested in that because you've been doing this for a long time. You're fully keto, definitely keto adapted, and you're in great shape. So, I would imagine that you could probably, do this and get some real, I would not, if not improvements in your performance, at least you're not going to drop down. I would bet that you actually get improvements, but I would bet even more that you'd at least not drop your performance. Yeah.
That's an experiment yet to happen. But yeah, it's the
Yeah.
way I'm thinking
Yeah.
of testing things in the future. It's like all
Yeah.
this stuff. I believe it's an evolution, not a revolution.
Hmm.
You go
Yeah.
in too quickly, you burn yourself in the process. But
Hmm.
uh, yeah,
Well, and the thing is too, is that, I mean, you haven't hit that wall yet, right? So it could be, and obviously you're trying to preempt that. You don't want to hit it in the first place. But, it could be that, if you were to try this, you just say, okay, I've got my jellies on me. And so if there's a problem, I know where to turn, but maybe let's see how far I can go. And while I'm feeling good, and if I'm not feeling good, okay, I've got 10 grams of glucose right there. You could also think about, okay, well, if there is a problem, maybe try just putting it in your mouth or having something sweet or, a bit of honey or something like that, or, watered down honey and just rinsing that, just having that in your mouth and getting that sweet flavor in your mouth, hitting those receptors on your tongue and just spitting it out and seeing what that does for you too. I would think that, well, I would actually bet that you probably would go through without using either because you probably just feel great the whole time. But it would be interesting to see, okay, then, is it actually you need energy or is it that central governor of fatigue? I would bet it's the central governor of fatigue. And that's what, people like Paul Mason and I believe Tim Noakes is on board with that as well. But it's a very interesting thought. Obviously, we're sort of at the sharp end of this, with elite athletes such as yourself, and trying these different sorts of things. But it's very interesting all the same. Most people just living their day-to-day life, or even performing in fairly decent and strenuous recreational sports and activities probably are just not even going to run into this. And they're definitely not going to need any carbs. They're hands down going to get everything that they need just from their body being in ketosis or being fasted. So it's interesting to sort of think of this at the very sharp end of elite athletics. But I still have that suspicion that I'm sort of more inclined that it's probably, just can be fully done all on its own and very, very, at the very most, sort of the governor sort of issue, I would bet. That would be my bet anyway.
The putting a little bit of sugar or sucking something sweet under the tongue has been used in running for a long time
Mm,
as a trigger if you're hitting the wall and don't have a lot of nutrition on hand to
right.
trick your body. I have heard that you do get it does trigger an insulin response,
Mm,
but I've also heard that if you don't have the fuel that to then back up the insulin response in time, you can actually sort of then get a bit of an energy trough afterwards as well. So you get your hit, but then a bit of a downer. So it'd be interesting to know the science if that really is the case or.
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. Yeah, it's I suppose it'd be how much you do because you can get a bit of an insulin trigger, but again, is that going to be as much of an issue with ketogenic athletes who don't preload insulin, right? And so if you have insulin preloaded and ready to go and you do this, you'll probably release some of that. But if you don't have it preloaded, is your body going to start, okay, maybe it starts making it up, but maybe it has to get into your bloodstream before it actually starts using it. That's typically what you see. People say that your insulin resistance actually goes up when you go ketogenic because they don't know how biology works. But the reason being is they say, well, your oral glucose tolerance test, your OGTT, that can go up, when you've been ketogenic for a while, but then you check it again, 2 hours later, 5 hours later, you actually get a better response. And if you check that with insulin called a Kraft test, then you'll actually see that you actually don't have insulin. Your blood sugar is up because your insulin isn't present, right? It's very low. And then as your insulin goes up, blood sugar goes straight down. So actually there's a perfect insulin response. It's just that, you have to actually know how the body works and to be able to recognize those patterns. So if you're not pre-making that insulin, you may not get that at all. But if you do get a bit of an insulin spike, yeah, you can get reactive hypoglycemia, but it just depends on how much. If you're just having a bit of a taste of sugar, you're not going to get a huge hit of insulin.
Okay.
you should get a corresponding hit of insulin, right? Because it's not like a massive amount. So, I mean, we have bigger doses of insulin because we're eating hundreds of grams of carbs in a sitting, a bunch of pizza and rice and cakes and all that sort of stuff, sodas. So your body has to make a big, large amount of insulin. Like the OGTT is only 75 uh, grams of oral glucose. That's a lot. You're just sucking that down in one go. And so, and even then, it's a very delayed insulin response when you're ketogenic and you've been ketogenic long term because you're not producing that. But it would be interesting. And so, the thing is that, if your blood sugar does drop a little bit, you still have ketones. And, they've done studies back before they had an ethics committee on these sorts of studies. And they got people's ketones nice and high, and then they started dropping their blood sugar lower and lower and lower to the point that normally you'd be in a coma. And they were talking to them, hey, how you feeling? Yeah, fine. Why? What's wrong? Nothing, nothing. No, just carry on. And so, there was, so there's that. So I mean, your brain, your body, run on ketones, and as we saw by the Volek and Finney study, even upwards of 90% VO2 max, your muscles are still burning fat. So people say, oh, you have to have burn carbs. Your muscles only run on glycogen. No, that's not true. You have glycogen, but the majority of it is fat oxidation. And so, over that 3-hour trial, they actually were testing, what fuel source they were using, and it was really 90% of fat oxidation the entire way. It was very steady across. It was nearly exactly 90% fat oxidation that they used as energy. So while you do need glycogen for certain things, which is why you have glycogen, which is why you make glycogen, it's not the prevailing energy source when you're in a ketogenic metabolism. In a carbohydrate metabolism, yes, but not the ketogenic metabolism. And we even know this in wolves. I found a study from 1981 that looked at wolves, and because this was the height of you have to eat carbs to burn carbs, there's no way around it. And the premise of this study was like, well, wolves don't carb load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. So, do they even have blood sugar? Do they have glycogen? You're like, well, let's check. And they found that yes, they do. And it's rock solid. It's just very consistent no matter what they're doing. They're loping around, chasing down caribou for 10 hours, or they're at rest, or they're playing, or they just before they eat, just after they eat. It's just here. Blood sugar just did not vary, and glycogen was very consistent as well. So it's so we at least know in them, and now we know from Volek and Finney that we get the same thing. Even when you're eating carbs, you're actually not going to get a glycogen advantage. Certainly not in recovery anyway. And even prior to the exercise, they had the same glycogen. It wasn't like one had way higher muscle glycogen, but they both had the same performance. No, they had the same muscle glycogen before, after it was lower, and then 3 hour recovery, it recovered, and they all had sort of nearly exactly the same muscle glycogen. The other thing to remember is, as athletes, and you probably know this, but for people that don't, let's say for a 65 kilo individual with maximal glycogen storage in their body, in their liver and their muscles. So the max amount of glycogen that their liver and muscles can store, they can store about 2,400 kilocalories of energy. So that's certainly a good amount that'll last you for a long time, but it's not going to get you through a marathon. It's not going to get you through an ultra. Certainly not going to get you around Mont Blanc. But that same 65 kilo individual at 6% body fat, so elite body composition, actually has over 35,000 kilocalories of energy available to him just in that 6% body fat, right? So when you raise your insulin, you sort of block that off, and now you can't mobilize those fat stores until that insulin comes down. So now you're once you do that, you raise your insulin enough, you really can't burn fat, and now you really have to go to carbs, unless you want to fight through the wall and maybe force yourself into a fat oxidization mode, if that is indeed what's happening. But it's it's much more, there's 15 times more energy available if you just in a ketogenic state. And so, especially for a high performance athlete who needs a lot of energy for their sport, it's it's a huge advantage. Yeah. Do you find that I mean, you're having your little gels and maybe, a bit of something, but I would imagine that your compatriots, they're probably just sucking down all sorts of calories and just gels and goo and food. What does that
Absolutely.
look like? Yeah.
Oh, it's all aimed at carbs.
Hmm.
Especially here in Thailand. In Europe, they have a little bit more of a broader base of sort of the macros. They got protein and fat, because Europeans like to have their their fat and their protein as part of their meals.
Hmm.
Here in Thailand, it's really carb orientated. So yeah, it was particularly interesting seeing them all here, and a lot of Asian runners in the event here too, from China, Japan, Korea, and they seem very carb orientated as well. So it suited them, but yeah, it there was definitely a few people sort of heaving on the side of a trail. Jenny was a little bit behind me, and she said she saw a lot of people vomiting and
Yeah.
uh, marks where they had. So obviously, people are having a lot of GI issues.
Mm.
It was also very hot, like it was 32
Mm.
degrees in the day, a little bit cooler at night, but there wasn't a lot of relief there. So the heat also takes a toll on people. And I reckon when it's really hot, the sugary things are even harder to handle.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah.
especially if you're having sweet drinks, you really want to be having water with electrolytes, not syrupy drinks. And some of the drinks they had on offer, oh, they were
Mm. Yeah. Gross. Well, also you don't want to be digesting food. You want to be running. You're trying to run, you're trying to move. Your body has rest and digest, fight and flight. You have the parasympathetic and some sympathetic sort of processes that come on accordingly, and you try to mix those two, and you try to perform while you're going through a rest and digest. How would we expect to have the best performance that we could have? Obviously, I think it would definitely dampen your performance just in general, but would also just make you feel rotten, and you may not even finish the race like 1,000 people didn't. Um, how long was that ultra, the one around Mont Blanc?
in distance, 176 kilometers,
Yeah.
but in time,
Mhm.
it took me 39 hours and 40 minutes.
Yeah. Wow.
You, it starts at 6 p.m. You
Hmm.
run through the first night, the next day, and then the next night, and then I finished about 10 o'clock in the morning. I was lucky that the cutoff time was 46 and a half hours, so there's still people coming in almost 7 hours later.
Jeez.
But the hard thing about that event is it's 2 nights running.
Mm.
Like the one on the weekend here, we started at 7 in the morning and I finished just after midnight. So yeah, one night's mucked up a bit, but I wasn't running all night, and your body can cope with that. But 2 nights is really challenging,
Yeah.
especially the second night. You're just you're pretty tired and your body
Mhm.
clock's fighting against you. And I find that's the hardest thing in the long events is this fighting the circadian rhythms, not the nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. Um, that's um, that's a grueling run, and not being able to sleep at all. You just have to run 39 hours straight do they even have lights? You have like a headlamp or something like that?
Oh yeah,
People
yeah.
falling off cliffs and
It's
things
all
like that.
technical. Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
unfortunately it does happen. There's been people
Jeez.
killed in these events,
Oh gosh.
by falling off. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would
yeah,
imagine, I mean, you're exhausted and it's pitch black, and you're just you're not going to have this sure footing. Yeah, that's pretty rugged. Well, you think about, okay, so call it 40 hours and you were averaging 20 grams of carbs per hour. I mean, that's not even what like a small child would eat in a day. It's 400 grams of carbs over the course of, 40 hours, and you're doing this ultra marathon. So that's not a lot of a lot of energy. That's not even just going to take care of your basal metabolic rate, let alone, your performance, which is sort of, again, sort of makes me a lot more confident that like that's not what you're running on, because you're using way more energy than that. And were you eating other things as well? Or is it really just those gels and
In
during the
in
whole
the
thing?
event in France, basically it was the gels, the jellies,
Hmm.
not gels, the actual gels you get in pouches. I can't stand them. I've had one of them in my
Hmm.
life, and that was enough. No,
Hmm.
these are homemade jelly, quite a dense jelly, and then watermelon, one or two slices when available. Probably cheese, salami. They do is naturally fermented salamis, which are really nice. Um, Oh, and rice with clear broth on it
Hmm.
occasionally when they've got the hot meal sort of counters in the aid stations, but they don't have them in every one. And then what I do is, so every half an hour I'd have my jelly, but if I'm in an aid station near the half hour mark, then that what I have in the aid station will be my food, and I won't have the jelly for the next half hour. And
Hmm.
then I'd do a mental calculation on how much I've had to, sort of try and not go over in the UTMB, I tried not to go over 40 grams per hour, and here in Thailand it was 30 grams limit.
Hmm. Okay. And then, so with this sort of thing, would you take a bit of a break to go and get the aid station, get some water, get some electrolytes, and have a bite to eat, or would you sort of like grab cups on the run and just keep going?
No, you stop and reload, but you try to keep the time down.
Hmm.
In the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc event, they gave me a statistic at the end of how long I'd spent in rest stations,
Mm.
and it was 3 hours and 10 minutes, which
Yeah.
surprised me.
Yeah. Right.
That was a lot, and yet I actually did a lot of them quicker than I had in previous years doing other events there. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I hate to imagine what the statistics were the previous years, but
Yeah.
getting better. But I need to improve a lot more. So here in Thailand, there's only one aid station where I sat on a chair, and that was one where you get the drop bag and it had all the hot meals and things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that was a longer stop, but other than that, 5 minutes probably enough to sort of put the pack down, get the water bottles out, rearrange the food, get the nutrition on for the next section, and then go.
Yeah, well, I mean, just right there now, you can just cut off 3 hours by just, just skipping the aid stations and
Well, a couple at least
yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, that's great. How long was that your PB on the marathon? What's your fastest marathon at the moment?
Well, I've never run a road marathon, so we're talking
Okay.
trial events.
Yeah.
So it was about um, 4 hours 50, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, because of the vertical component.
Okay.
Uh, Never tried a road marathon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's
I'm
all
off a
off-road.
few of
Yeah.
these trial events. I might have a go one day, but I'm not really a road runner because
Yeah.
where we live in Snowy Mountains, 15 meters from our front door, we've got a dirt single track trail. So
Mhm.
never really been tempted to run on the road too much. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah. Well, obviously with that elevation and the ups and downs, that's pretty brutal. It's very different than just, running on a flat track or a road or anything like that. Very different conditions. So yeah, that's great. That's good. All right. Well, Mick, well, thank you so much for that. That was great to hear. It was really interesting to hear your experience with that. And again, absolutely congratulations on such a like amazing set of performances. It sounds like you're just getting started and just starting to hit your stride now. So looking forward to seeing a lot of big things from you. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. It's been good to be able to sort of put the story out there that endurance can go along with carnivore. So the
Mm-hmm.
two marry together quite well.
Yeah,
Still
absolutely.
got a lot more to learn along the way. So
Yeah, and improving your health and allowing people at any age to all of a sudden, go out and run 100 miles around a mountain and go up and down the other side of Everest in elevation. So that's amazing. It's really, really impressive. Um, do you have social media or any way that people can follow you and see your performance and progress?
I've started a Facebook group
Hmm.
for carnivore and low carb ultra runners,
Okay.
and yeah, that's got a few people joining at the moment. It's only very new, but that's basically going to be a place where we can exchange information about that particular approach to ultra running. Doing carnivore and low carb, trying to minimize the carbs, and the tricks and tips in doing those long events. What sort of can help you make the finish, and because
Mhm.
they have a high attrition rate, and it's people sometimes travel halfway around the world to do these events. So it's nice to have somewhere where you can learn some of the nuances of it. So hopefully, when you have a go at it, you'll stand a better chance of finishing it. So
Mhm.
mm,
Yeah. No, well, that's great. Well, we'll put that up in the description, and people can go and check that out. I think that's great to have an online community for people that are, trying to do this. And yeah, and so I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that, are looking for something like this and interested in checking that out. So hopefully they can go and find you there. Mick, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for taking the time.
thanks, Anthony.
No problem. Thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch as well. If you like this, please do hit the like and leave a comment and let us know what you think and share this with someone you think that would benefit by it. And if you haven't subscribed, please do hit that bell and subscribe as well because it lets me know I should keep putting out things like this. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time. Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.